Today, I'm talking to Michael Townsend Williams, an advocate and a trainer of well-doing. And well-doing actually means as much as leading a busy and a productive life, but not at the expense of health and well-being. And the key to doing so, as I've understood and as I also know from experience, is actually through the breath and by breathing. Michael is a doer who also likes to be. And I have to say, this combination of doing and being really resonates with me, as I both love to do, but I don't want to lose myself in it. I also want to be. Michael is the author of Do Breathe, Calm Your Mind, Find Focus, and Get Stuff Done. And I have to say, Michael, I really appreciate your book. We talked about it just previously already for some time. It's without fluff, and I think it's very practical. I know that it's written a few years ago, so I'm curious to see also what new learnings and new insights might have come up. And I really appreciated the chapters on organizing energy and habits. However, what I really want to talk to you about is actually breathing. So thanks so much for being here and for talking. It's been already a greatly interesting conversation so far. It's a shame that we couldn't record it, but at least we're moving on from here. Michael, I'd like to start with a personal question, if I may. Because first you were in marketing in the corporate world, and then you shifted to yoga, to wellness, and actually well-doing. Could you share some of your personal journey and your personal story, how you transitioned from basically this corporate world and where you discovered actually the power of breathing?
Yeah, so I guess I worked in advertising, agencies like Saatchi & Saatchi, Young & Rubicam, Ligis Delaney from the mid-80s. And I guess in that time, I had one very successful stress management strategy, which wasn't breathing at the time, it was drinking. And like a lot of people, so I was an alcoholic ad man, I guess it would be the way to simplify that. Yeah. And then in 1998, on November the 2nd, which is today, which is interesting. My younger brother, Jonathan, who was 31 at the time, fell from a 15th floor balcony in Kuala Lumpur and died on impact. Yeah. And I got a phone call at Young & Rubicam, 9:30 in the morning on November the 2nd, 1998. And I kind of broke down, I guess, understandably. My younger brother had died. Yeah. And I had an emotional breakdown. I was crying. I was like deeply devastated. But at the same time as feeling that, I felt this kind of rod of iron going up my spine and this kind of inner capacity to cope, I guess. And at this time, I didn't really understand the significance of this moment. But also I had a kind of like a lightning strike hit in my head going, what the fuck are you doing in advertising? You know, it's kind of like, you know, it wasn't a subtle thing. There was a very kind of transformative moment for me. Yeah. Where I was, you know, taking in the deep tragedy of my brother. I was realizing I couldn't go on with my life as it was in any way. But I also realized I had this kind of superpower inside to deal with this. And I went home. I had to then phone my father and tell him his son had died, which was a very difficult thing, as you can imagine. But in this kind of moment of deep sadness, I guess I was very present. I was kind of very much with what I needed to do. And in fact, the first time I spoke publicly was at my brother's funeral. And I was kind of sure I didn't want to work in advertising, but I had no idea what else to do. I think one of the blocks I had was, you know, a lot of people in advertising, you end up earning a lot of money, but you're not really trained or qualified. You kind of just end up there. And, you know, if you think, what else can I do to earn all this money? It's kind of like nothing else really. So you kind of hit a block. And so I knew I didn't want to do it, but I had no idea what else to do. So like a lot of people, I bought books on, you know, the work you were born, you know, the life you were born to lead or whatever it was. And you know, I kind of started looking for my purpose, I guess. And I went to my first yoga class out of kind of desperation and depression and grief, not really knowing what to expect. And I just found that, lying down and connecting to my body was strange at first. Although I'd been into sports when I was younger, I'd kind of completely become disembodied. I was so much in my mind and my thoughts. So I was kind of like, oh, wow, I've got a body. I'm lying down. I can feel my body. And then it was a good yoga teacher who obviously connected to breathing, which I'd never thought about before that moment. And I guess after an hour of yoga, breathing and relaxation, I came out of that class feeling mentally and physically so well in a way that I hadn't ever felt for a very, very long time. And so I guess that first class. And so that first class made me realize that I had the means within me to transform how I felt quite dramatically. And I think up until that point, I thought I was the victim of the world a bit. I think it was kind of like how I was kind of not really up to me. It was kind of whatever life dealt me. And it gave me that kind of inner connection with my breath and the body. And I started going to yoga regularly, but it was not what I thought was my vocation. It was my kind of therapy and my healing. And I was working for an Italian ad agency at the time, and practicing yoga and acknowledging that I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was uncomfortable about that. And I think that what yoga and the breath helped me was when you're uncomfortable and you don't really know what you want to do, which is probably the case for most people if they're really honest with themselves, we make up stories, don't we? If someone says, what do you really want to do? We kind of go, well, if I had all the money and I could really do what I'll go and do this. And we kind of create an answer to that question, which we all know deep down inside is just the kind of thing we're throwing away. We don't really know the answer. And we create these stories because we don't want to stay with that uncomfortable feeling of really not knowing. And I think that in my yoga practice, it helped me because, I wasn't particularly flexible practicing yoga. I was like a lot of guys, played rugby and football. And so, stretching out my hamstrings was really hard, the yoga teacher's going, and breathe in and I'm getting inside I'm going, fucking hamstrings. I'm going to, there's this whole thing going on inside. And I was fighting it. And I was fighting that discomfort and making it worse, and it was building up that pressure. And a good teacher, in yoga will help you to feel the discomfort and breathe and accept it. And in the acceptance of it, it becomes a little bit less. And we know this from kind of research into mindfulness that people who think they have 8 out of 10 pain, just through relaxation and breathing exercises, they can say that they've got perceived pain of 3 out of 10, right? Which is quite a massive reduction when you think it's just someone controlling their autonomic nervous system. So I got good at staying with the discomfort, I guess, and not knowing what I wanted to do, but realizing that in the not knowing, your field of vision opens up. So this is kind of like, I don't know the diagram to do this, maybe you'll think of a diagram for this, but there is a kind of, the more you think that you know, the more limited your vision, and therefore the more limited a world that you see. And so when you suddenly go, I don't know, it's uncomfortable, it's vulnerable, you feel exposed, you feel fraudulent, you feel stupid. And I can hear everybody kind of nodding their heads as they listen to this. So you're in that place of not knowing, but because you're in that place of not knowing, you're open to whatever is there, and your mind and your eyes can explore a wider horizon. So I was in that kind of place of not knowing, and I was at a place called Monkton Wild, an alternative community in Dorset in England. And I was there with my young children, still really not knowing what to do with my life. And there was a yoga teacher, Prem, that didn't turn up to one of the classes. So the families would be the kids would be looked after, parents could do some yoga. It was a highlight of the day or the week. And one day he didn't turn up, and I was waiting there with some other people, and a little voice in my head just said, "Why don't you teach the yoga class?" Now, we all get that little quiet voice in our head, and normally when we hear it, we kind of like go, "Oh no," and we push it away, and we go, "Thank God I didn't open my mouth and say that thing," right? Yeah. Well, I couldn't stop it. It wasn't a deliberate choice. I couldn't stop it. My mouth just opened, and I said, "Well, I could try," because I've been at this stage practicing yoga quite a lot. And I made it clear I wasn't a teacher, but I could kind of have a go. Yeah. And they were delighted. So I walked into the room, wood floor, and I kind of laid down the yoga mats, and I lit a candle and some incense. And I thought, wow, this is what I want to do.
Oh, right?
Now, but it wasn't through going on a workshop or working with a coach or reading a book or whatever. It was being in a place of vulnerability and not knowing, and a bit of discomfort, listening to the little quiet voice, which we all have, but is hard to listen to sometimes. And then acting on that little voice, which is another crucial step. And as I stepped into the unknown, following the little voice, I had a feeling in my heart. So for me, when people talk about following your heart, it's a very glib kind of thing. It can only really make sense to you when you've had an experience, when you've followed your heart, and you can recognize what the feeling is. And the feeling is one of kind of just knowing without thinking, right? So it's knowing without thinking. It's kind of a pulling. Yeah, there's a pull, but you don't know from where, right? Outside of it, it's kind of like making you feel like this. And of course, the other way that you know that you're having that pull is immediately your rational mind will kick in and go, you can't be a yoga teacher, you've got a mortgage, you've got 2 young children, there's no way. And actually my rational mind kicked in and told me all these reasons I couldn't be a yoga teacher. And then I mentioned it to my wife at the time, and she had a very similar voice to my inner critic, Julius, I must say. She sounded just like the inner critic I already heard, but a little bit louder, and but again, when you feel this kind of calling, for want of a better word, I wasn't asking her permission. It was something I was going to do. And I think that comes a little bit from tragedy and from the death of my brother, and the way that you just kind of think, fuck, he was 31, life's really short. If I feel a calling to do something that I want to do, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to wait. What idiot would wait? It's kind of like, and so, obviously then I picked up the phone. I was involved in a mobile marketing technology startup at the time. So if you can imagine, this is 4 years before the iPhone, 2002. So we knew that there was going to be a mobile world, right? But no one knew what it was going to look like. And I was at the forefront of that. But we were running out of money. So a management buyout of that business fell through. I went on to an intensive 4-week yoga teacher training course. And I picked up the phone to my bank and got my mortgage put on hold. And I did everything I could to reduce my outgoings. And literally, took a 90% drop in salary with complete faith I was doing the right thing. So it was kind of strange, really, because, I think anybody rationally would have, my wife as well, it was a very kind of stupid thing financially to do. And you could argue with 2 young children, it was irresponsible, right? But none of these doubts entered my head. I just felt I was doing the right thing. And I kind of had a kind of unshakable faith that the universe had my back. I wish I felt like that now. So I made the jump, and I've been teaching yoga for 20 years. I don't do it as a kind of career anymore. But it was it was from a moment of transformation, a moment of tragedy, a lot of listening and understanding the nudges that we have inside us, which are very subtle. People can say, I'm following my heart, I'm following this and whatever, but actually what's really happening is your brain is getting a number of different signals from different parts of you, from your genes, from your kind of subconscious, from your heart, from your gut, from your experience. All of these things are kind of coalescing, and at any one given point of time, you look at all of that and kind of go, you make a decision, right? But whatever decision or whatever movement you make from that very kind of fluffy inputs that we're getting from numerous sources, it's always a guess. It's always a guess, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And I read this actually in your book, but I forgot about it. And I'm not sure if the date was there, but it is crazy that was today's date.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, it is. It is, because it's also a very powerful day, because it's also, All Saints Day. So it's kind of, it's a very powerful time of the year.
Yeah, it is.
I think, I don't know how you feel, but I feel more and more affected by planets, moons, these kind of things that I don't really understand. I don't really understand them, but I do feel the communality of experience people have, around certain times of the year, and yeah, so it's a funny time for me, Julius, because it's kind of like it doesn't bring back memories, but it's a kind of heavy and wonderful kind of day for me. It's kind of like, I don't think it's possible to understand what my father's had to live with. He'd be 85 soon, but to lose a child is, probably got to be one of the most painful things to go through.
Still be alive yourself.
And still be alive yourself, yeah. But at the same time, I think that story I share, because it is true that in times of crisis and times of incredible suffering, and they are the times when the seeds of goodness are sown.
I wanted to say something about that, actually, because I think oftentimes we have this calling, if we will, this is already there. Also, before this happened with your brother, these feelings, or this sensation, if you will, it was already there. And yes. I think this catastrophic event kind of provides a catalyst, and that's often the case, when we need something where it snaps and where it breaks, and where we can't just keep on going any longer as we do, because we're creatures of habit and creatures of routines, and preferably the easy ones,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. It makes a lot of sense. One other thing you said, and I want to comment on that. You mentioned the not knowing, right? This part. And being vulnerable and actually tolerating and accepting that sensation. And that brings me to the breath, because what I've learned also from personal experiences, in order to grow, in order to move through things, we actually have to face them. There's a habit of trying to deviate around it, but we have to actually experience it. And I think actually the breath is probably the only way to actually do that, and to maintain being in that very uncomfortable spot where we have to face that really uncomfortable truth, or very painful truth in many cases. So what was the role of the breath for you in this, apart from that it was a part of the yoga practice probably? Was there an element for you personally where you discovered something in relation to the breath?
Well, I think the simple way in for me answering that is that your breath gives you a kind of window into now, right? Right. So there is, your breathing is always going on, whether you like it or not. So it's a kind of constant. It's a constant. It's always there. It's undeniable. It's, if it wasn't there, you wouldn't be alive. So from one very, very simple position is that most of us take it for granted. Mm-hmm. Right? We take everything for granted. Yeah. So just by noticing it, right, and not doing anything else, literally just noticing your breath, and if you want, you can kind of like see where you can feel it, and you can expand out from noticing your breath to a whole world and a whole universe, but just very simply, just by noticing, where you feel your breath in your body, and is it fast, is it slow, and just being curious, and it's there. That's a way of connecting to now, right? And now is the only moment that you can actually influence. Yeah. So that's the start point that I just. I guess I made friends with my breath, is the way I put it. So at first you can just notice it, and you can kind of notice it, and you kind of go, right, and then back to normal. Yeah. But eventually it's almost like, I think before I connected to my breath, I was very much thinking of that I am my thoughts and my mind. So when I'm walking along, I'm thinking, I'm creating, I'm planning. This is me doing all this stuff. And if I had moments of it not doing that, I would kind of think I wasn't there. Yeah. I would feel back to my thoughts and my scheming and whatever, and I'm back on track.
Well, on the contrary, you were more there probably in those moments.
Well, that's right. But obviously, when in my experience, when people I've taught have some of the first experiences of, let's say, an empty mind or not thinking, it's not a nice feeling, right? Surprisingly, actually, they have a feeling literally like, where have I gone? It's kind of like it's not nice, right? And that's because they just
uncomfortable.
They're just their thoughts. So if I'm not my thoughts, who the fuck am I? I'm my thoughts, right? I'm my thoughts is a bit like we talked earlier about a story. It's a simple story you tell yourself to prevent you from feeling the discomfort. Yeah. I've lost my thread there. Sorry, I have to cut there, right, Julius.
No, you're saying some interesting things. Actually, because another topic, another idea that I want to research, you mentioned this story. We tell ourselves a story, and you said that you tell yourself to not feel discomfort. And I think one of the ideas that I want to research is the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves to the people we meet. And most of the times that's old stuff and old stories which are no longer relevant today. Actually, I think what is a much more interesting place to be in is actually in the place of not knowing, because that means everything is open and everything is possible.
Well, I think that's kind of true, but I would approach it slightly differently.
Yeah, sure.
So for me, obviously, we have to be in the now, because actually we can't not be in the now, right? So there's a kind of a weird thing about people trying to be mindful, because you can't not be. It's like even if when you're thinking about the past, you're thinking about the past now. When you're kind of fantasizing about the future, you're doing that now. You can't not be in the now. Yeah, right. So now is where you start. But in terms of what's influencing now, I would look at it through two kind of dimensions. One is through the layers of your being. Yeah? And for me, that starts in a very deep place of acknowledging that, without the entire universe, you wouldn't exist. Right? So it's understand that there's a fundamental kind of truth in this moment now, which is the elements making up your body were created in stars and in the universe, and you wouldn't exist without that. So there's a billion years of history in now, right? Not kind of then, like now it's here, right? You then have all of the evolution of mankind and whatever in you now. You have all of the genetic effects of all your relatives affecting you now. Right? You have the mindset of your parents as they were bringing you up affecting you now. You have your experience as a child and growing up and everything affecting you now. You and I haven't even got into the kind of body, right? But then you get into the body and the kind of, you know, all the different systems of the body affecting you now in different ways, and then the different layers of your brain affecting you now. So now, which can sometimes sound so kind of boring, right? You know, it's like actually people kind of don't like mindfulness sometimes because it seems boring. Right? It's kind of like, you know, eating a grape slowly or whatever it is, yeah. But they're missing this kind of depth of the now, yeah. And I guess what I was trying to do in part of that layering is that other people's baggage is important, really, because a lot of other people's baggage is also your baggage. It's cultural baggage, it's intergenerational baggage, you know. And I think that, you know, when you're moving in this moment and you're fully kind of acknowledging that depth and that incredible history in you, right? That puts a little bit of context in some of people's concerns about the guy that shouted at them in a meeting last week, or whatever the kind of stuff going on in your kind of the top of your mind at the moment is, yeah. And then the other dimension is, you know, this kind of perceived time of past, now, future, realizing that in now, with all those layers of our being at our disposal, we're going to be experiencing the kind of push of the past and the pull of the future. But we can then decide, can't we? We can then choose, are we gonna act? Because if we act from the past without any involvement, the future will be like the past. It's kind of like it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same thing. So it's kind of
really, it's our awareness and our attention where we choose to focus. Those determines what manifests in a way. Yes,
but also it's a responsibility. I think that's before maybe the podcast started, when we were talking about there's a tendency of people to kind of want to fight the system. And I can completely relate to that kind of feeling of anger and outrage towards, you know, leaders of many systems at the moment. But we're part of the system. We are a node within the system, and our responsibility, feeling that depth of responsibility, the billions of years of evolution that have enabled us to be where we are now. Do we want to kind of shift things in any particular way or not, right? And what's our part to play? And obviously, when we're trying to make those decisions and we're trying to make those calls, if we're not experienced in understanding the breath and the depth of our being that we can access through our breath, then we can take these very short-term kind of little blips in our consciousness or things on a computer or whatever, and we're acting on all of this kind of stuff in a very robotic way that isn't using our embodied intelligence. And that's a kind of battle, but it's not a battle outside, it's a battle inside. It's an inner battle between, you know, the parts of us that want instant gratification and all of these kind of things. But the breath for me is the entry point into all of it. It's kind of like, you know, breathing can help me cope with it by kind of helping me get less stressed. Yes. Or if I'm kind of really fired up and, you know, and my breathing's got faster, just by my being aware of it, I can then kind of recalibrate the rest of my system to cope with the fact I'm breathing faster. And I've got a mechanism of control. So, you know, very simply, I think that if you are, you know, in a heightened state of anxiety and you're breathing fast and your heart rate goes up, it's not a very nice place to be. But if you slow your breathing down, you breathe from the belly, you breathe in and out through the nose, you cannot breathe slowly and deeply for a few minutes and continue to be frantically anxious in your mind. It's a bit like tapping your head. Is it tapping your head and rubbing your tummy? Do you know what I mean? You can't do those things. So the breath is the kind of connection between the mind and the body. And I think that simply, before I got into yoga, I was in my head all the time. Then I was in my head and my body. And then I was in my head and my body, realizing that the breath was the communication channel between the two. And so by connecting with your breath at any point in time, simplistically, you're connecting your head and your body, but you could say you are potentially connecting, now with, billions of years of potential. And it's an incredibly powerful feeling. And I find I can go and do 5 minutes of certain breath work and that can give me immense energy, immense kind of recalibration. I can shift from being depressed and kind of lost, and I have refound or reconstituted the power of now again. I don't know if I'm answering a question anymore.
You are actually, because I think the important part, what you said, is that at the beginning, and this has been an elaboration upon that part, which is that breath is a window to the now, and the more presence we can cultivate, the more awareness we have in this now and the vastness of this now, how it's been built up by our past experiences, billions of years even until this point. I imagine through our presence we can tap into it all also.
Well, that's it. So I think that the some of the sort of deeper, interesting work that I'm doing at the moment is around how I can apply very ancient yogic pranayama techniques to people today. And I think that where I'm connecting some of these threads, I think, in an interesting way, is that energetically in our body, without kind of knowing words for things, we kind of know that we've got kind of energy between our legs, say sexual energy, we can feel that. And we know that we've got kind of energy in our gut, and we can kind of feel that. And we know we've got energy in our heart, and we know we've got energy in our throat and in our head. And we know that each of those places, that energy feels a bit different, right? But it's kind of like, we don't really cultivate a language to talk about those things. We'll even feelings, I'd say most men that I coach who think they connect to their feelings, they don't connect to their feelings, they connect to their thoughts about their feelings.
Which right? Are not their feelings.
Which are not their feelings. And so when you the feeling in your head, the feeling in your throat, the feeling in your heart, feeling in your belly, feeling in the sexual organs, feeling at the base of your spine, they're all kind of chakra centers or nerve plexuses or whatever. You don't need to kind of buy into anything there, right? You don't have to kind of agree or not agree. You can literally just feel those. You can feel it, right? You can feel it, and you might have felt it a lot, or you might not. But if you spend time feeling it, you'll notice that those feelings are different. And you might not have connected them to anything important, but you can learn through doing this kind of spinal breathing technique, which you might or might know, where you kind of a very gentle hissing sound at the back of the throat, and you imagine your breath flowing up and down the center of the spine. Well, actually, if you just imagine you're just breathing up and down your spine slowly, and whilst you're breathing, you're feeling energy, right? You can feel those energy places. Now, I can feel my breath flowing up my spine as I inhale and down my spine as I exhale. So that can happen easily to people. For some people, it's a mystery. But if you just kind of just imagine you're breathing up and down your spine just for the sake of it, and just connect to the feelings, you're starting to understand some of the nuances of the intelligence of the human body. Yeah.
Yes.
So actually, what I can do, and I do with some clients, by doing this kind of breathing up and down the spine, you can focus at the base of your spine, which is about security, let's say. And if you're feeling a bit insecure at the moment in your life, maybe that will feel a bit kind of delicate. Sexual energy is also connected to creativity and play. Maybe that's an area you're neglecting. And the thing that's interesting is it's not about these things being right or wrong. It's understanding that all human beings are made up of these different energies. And sometimes they're kind of overemphasizing one over another. And it gives you a window into kind of self-diagnosing what you need, I guess. And so when I'm doing these kind of deeper breathing practices, I can feel that I've got a lack of connection at the moment. Yeah, a lack of connection with people. So I understand it in a more nuanced way what that feeling means, what my body is trying to say that I need. Yeah, and I think that going back to something earlier you said, I think one of the problems we have today is people playing the language of words that are a way of masking what they're saying rather than explaining what they're saying. So men, for example, will often say, "I'm depressed." Yeah, if they're down, right? A man will say he's depressed, and by saying he's depressed, the whole of his system starts saying, "Oh, I'm depressed, I better go to this." So your whole body is now preparing because you're depressed, because that word has sent that signal to your heart, to your gut, all the parts of you. I'm depressed, I need to act, we're depressed. But if I speak to a client and we ask him or her a few questions about the depression, they're not depressed. Actually, they're sad. They're sad they haven't seen their kids for a bit. They're not depressed. Yeah. And when they suddenly kind of think that they're sad because they're missing their kids, that sends a different message in their body, and they feel different now. Right? They don't feel different because anything has changed in the world. They've just changed the word that they're using, and words represent concepts and stuff. So there is I think there's work to be done, and I'm talking a lot about men because I think it is a particularly male issue, actually, of connecting to how we feel and understanding those feelings, not intellectually, but where they're really coming from. Because if you say to yourself, "I'm depressed," right, and you go around saying you're depressed, you'll probably go and behave like depressed people. Whereas if you say that you're sad, you'll have a different thing. And a lot of it's macho, I think, Judith. I think it's like, men don't like using words like "I'm sad" and "lonely," which is actually a massive problem with men. So I think, understanding feelings and your breath can allow you to do that, because I've seen before with very stressed men, they tend to kind of avoid issues by distracting themselves, right? So one interesting bit of mindfulness research
with the drinking when you was in the ag world.
Yeah. Same thing. It's distraction, and I think that the interesting research in mindfulness showed that women get the benefits of mindfulness more quickly than men, and what they found, and I think there's some truth in this, is that women tend to ruminate and go around and worry about stuff, and when they practice mindfulness and that slows down, and they stop worrying as much, they go, "I like this. I like this. I can see this working," and they commit to it. Whereas a typical man who is avoiding all the shit in his life by distracting himself with video games, football, or whatever, when they calm down, they become more mindful, and all the shit comes up. Yeah. They go, "Oh wow, this is shit. This mindfulness. I'm not going to do this."
Because it's confrontational if you actually do it, because you have to move through this shit.
Yeah. So we can't underestimate, for some people, learning to relax and slow down and accept whatever comes up. Because again, in terms of that acceptance, again, another thing that I've discovered is that everyone's traumatized. People were traumatized before COVID. They're even more traumatized now. Yeah. So there is that, very serious issue, which is, for some people, trauma's coming up is so painful for them. They need to be, obviously in the right environment with the right people to support them, to enable them to feel that. But the real thing I find in trauma is it's about feeling it and really feeling the pain that you have inside,
allowing it to be there,
and allowing it. But we cannot, accepting really difficult things is a kind of weird process, because you can't decide to accept. I remember trying to meditate one morning and thinking, I'm going to really meditate well today. I'm going to really crack it today. So obviously I'm sitting there kind of like feeling shit and feeling useless and I can't do it and whatever. Yeah. And in the moment of utter frustration when I thought, fuck it, I give up, that's when I felt all this inner peace, because I did literally just give up. Yeah. So this acceptance thing, sometimes the word sounds so soft and so nice, doesn't it? It's like let go, accept stuff. And the actual process of acceptance is an uncomfortable one, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, there's a release and there's I just have to accept it. And I think, being a recovering alcoholic, obviously there's the Serenity Prayer we repeat at the end of sessions. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to say into things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And accepting things you can't change, you only know when you're doing that when you feel how difficult it is to do it. Yeah. It's not an easy thing at first to accept things you can't change. But it is an incredibly liberating thing. But how many of us don't accept things that we can't change and then don't have the courage to act on the things that we can change? And that's that maybe has become a little bit of the focus of my present work, is realizing that we need to act, we need to do stuff. It's not, you can't just be drinking green smoothies, going on yoga retreats and thinking it's going to solve anything. No. And acting and actually kind of moving into fear, building courage is something that I don't think they like to talk about really in wellness and well-being. They kind of do, but they don't really, because it's tough, right? It's really tough. And I think that's why, I think in our earlier conversation, I find that in this crux of having the courage to do the things you can, entrepreneurs, startup founders, they're incredibly courageous people, walking into the unknown, on a daily basis. And I think there's a need for people in yoga and well-being to kind of demonstrate that they're prepared to walk into the flames of their own flames a bit more, Are
you familiar with the courage to be disliked? Basically, about Adlerian psychology.
I don't, but it reminds me of a quote, which is, "What other people think of you is none of your business."
It's very true. I'll send you the link later. It's a wonderful book.
But again,
with a lot of saying now.
But it's an incredibly liberating thought, though, isn't it? When you really don't care what other people think of you, which can sound very arrogant, can't it? I mean, it can sound like an awfully arrogant thing to say, but not caring about other, it is a key to unlock, isn't it? It unlocks a lot when you really don't care. Yes. But I'd say for most people are so indoctrinated in caring what other people believe in lots of different levels, it's a hard nut to crack for a lot of people, I think. Yeah. But it's an important one. It's an important one.
Let me ask you another question, because in your book, and I like this, I don't know where you got the statistics, but you mentioned that in our life, we breathe around 600 million times in a lifetime. And it means we breathe a lot, obviously. I mean, the number is not so important.
I counted up to 1 million and then just kind of like just extrapolated out from there is how we came up with the number.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, you had to start somewhere, and then.
Well, I couldn't count more. I thought counting over 1 million would be a bit kind of too much for me. But yeah. Sorry, I'm just joking.
So what I was going to say, would you say that people in general, being it that they breathe so much during their lives, that they know how to breathe properly? I guess I know the answer. Or could they use some extra awareness on training when it comes to breathing? And if so, what could we do simply as an exercise to improve our breathing and our awareness of it? Do you have an exercise to suggest?
Absolutely. So I think the key thing to remember with breathing is that you were born to do it well.
Yes.
And we've all been babies. Some of us will have been parents. So the technique I'm going to share is not really a technique or kind of exercise. In a way, it's guiding you back to a natural breath, which you will recognize. Now, some of you will recognize it immediately, and some of you it will take time, but it's natural. It's not a kind of thing I've invented. Right? And the basics for me, the first thing is to connect to breathing from your belly.
Yeah.
And if you're breathing from your belly, diaphragmatic breathing, you basically bring in more oxygen and energy with less effort. So by breathing from your belly, you will get more energy with less effort. Also, by breathing from your belly, energetically, you're in control of your emotional center, right? So you breathe from your belly. The second thing, to breathe in and out through the nose, not always as much as possible, because your nose is designed to clear out the dust particles and warm the air to a nice temperature for your lungs. I recommend breathing out from your nose most of the time where possible, because obviously you can control the flow of an out breath through the nose more easily than through the mouth. So you breathe from the belly, you breathe in and out through the nose. Also, breathing from the nose has benefits for the way that the brain functions. So there's research showing that as well. So breathe from the belly, breathing in and out through the nose. And then we get to the kind of speed of breathing. And this is probably one of the crucial things I've observed. Most people now are breathing on average 15 breaths per minute. So they're kind of breathing in and breathing out. They're breathing in and they're breathing out. And you can observe this. You watch people on trains, planes. That's kind of what most, and people tend to breathe through the mouth and tend to breathe from the chest. So they're kind of doing suboptimal breathing a lot. Now,
it's too shallow.
It's too shallow, right? So I can go into more and more depth with this. The key thing, the shallowness, is that if you don't breathe out completely, you still have old air in your lungs. Yeah. So if you kind of breathe out a little bit, you've got 50% old air, 50% new air. Doesn't matter how much you breathe in, you're not going to get 50%, more than 50% new air. Only when you exhale out fully can you then breathe in to 100% capacity. Yeah. So shallow breathing is top of the lungs, but also it's about the length and the depth of them. But I think to start with, we just want to think in general, everyday life, can I bring my breathing from 15 breaths down to 10 breaths per minute? In fact, when we're teaching classical meditation, 10 breaths per minute, breathing in for 3 and breathing out for 3, is the most common rhythm. It's not saying that any of these things are right or wrong. There's nuance, and children, for example, breathe slightly faster. But if you can think that for a meditation breathing in 1, 2, 3, breathing out 1, 2, 3, breathing from the belly, breathing in and out through the nose, that rhythm, you should be able to sit in meditation for half an hour. You should be able to do work in that kind of breathing. You should be able to walk. You should be able to cook. That should be kind of a living rhythm. If, however, you are flustered or kind of unscented and you want the most therapeutic breath, and again, this is all contextually needs to be relevant, I would say breathing at 6 breaths per minute. So 6 breaths per minute is the most optimal breathing rate to have a positive impact on your autonomic nervous system. So there's research into this, and there's arguments over, 5.7, 6 point, whatever, but 6 breaths per minute, which is breathing in for a count of 5 and breathing out for a count of 5, is what I would recommend you use as a kind of therapeutic thing when you're not feeling great,
Mm-hmm.
and also as a training breath. So for me, if you go to, I think, the Now page on my Do Breathe website, there's a video, and you can just have that playing in the background. You're breathing in for 5, breathing out for 5. So it's a good training, because it's kind of training your nervous system, so next time you'll be able to cope a little bit better with whatever life throws at you. So there'll be my 2 starting places: breathing from the belly through the nose, breathe in for 3, out for 3, anytime you want. Breathe in for 5 and out for 5 as a kind of therapeutic training breath. And then the last thing I would say is that I think most people are slightly overstimulated, so they need to emphasize their parasympathetic part of their nervous system. So I'd go lengthen exhalations when you need to do that. So I'm going to say that. So the tendency, I think, if you're kind of having an anxiety attack, is to think you need to breathe in more. I need more oxygen. But what you always need to do is breathe out more. And if you do long, deep exhalations, that's what slows your heart rate down. That's what relaxes the muscles. So that's a relaxation. So we've got kind of equal breathing, a general kind of thing. We've got a 6 breaths per minute, which you could call kind of coherent breathing. Mm-hmm. Without going into too much detail. And then you've got like kind of a longer, deeper exhalation to relax. And I think one of the secrets is kind of realizing you can do this anytime you need to. Right? So I'm always amazed for myself and other people. Close your eyes, breathe from the belly, breathe through the nose, and breathe in for 5, out for 5. Just do kind of 2, or even just doing 2 or 3 breaths like that.
Yeah, it changes everything.
Oh wow, I mean, and too many important decisions have been made at the moment by people that don't have access to that incredible depth we have as human beings. Yeah. And if you think, if you're breathing in for 5 and out for 5, your breathing is the only system you have conscious control over. And as you do that, your heart is suddenly beating at a better rhythm. The brain starts to open up in different places.
It's kind of like a reset.
It's resetting all of these things. So it's kind of but I like to think of you're going down into the depths of now. You're suddenly pulling up all of that power from the stars, the elements, millions of years of evolution, all the things that your parents and grandparents learned. You're bringing all of that and going, okay, how can I move in the world? Yeah. And I think that in some of these deeper breathing things I'm doing with the energy centers, energy centers are also connected to planets, and you can find a way, and this is what the yogis, believe. You access, the universe through your breath and through the connection with the energy you have in your body. But you're not doing this in a kind of hopeful way, as if it's kind of maybe might work. You're doing it because you're feeling it, but you're also kind of understanding that this is not esoteric rubbish. You're just connecting to the truth of you as a human being. You couldn't be here without the planets. You couldn't exist. Right? We're part of it. So we're part of it. So that depth of now gives you then a responsibility as a node in the system to go, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? How am I going to behave in light of that? And the more people that do that, the more chance we've got that tomorrow will be a little bit better than today. Yeah, definitely.
I have 2 more questions, and actually I have many more, but I have actually a call for my real work.
Your real work.
at 3, so I'm restricted by time. But first question. You are aware of the work of Wim Hof, I'm sure, and maybe shamanic breathing, which is kind of the opposite of what you just talked about, which is taking.
Well, you see, what I think is that there's a starting point, and I'm talking about a starting point as a foundation and a basis. Yeah, and I think that the stuff that Wim does is great. I kind of have nothing against these things. I've done rebirthing breath work, whatever that's called now, and they have a different breathing technique about bringing traumas up.
Correct. And shamanic breathing, shamanic journey.
Yeah, lots of, and there are lots of different ways into things, but they have a different place. So, for example, the rebirthing breath work is great for kind of getting in touch with deep traumatic stuff in your body, but in my experience is not conducive to
everyday life.
higher everyday life, but also higher states of meditative consciousness. So for me, sitting in a cross-legged position with my spine straight, practicing certain techniques it's another world. It's another world of experience to lying down doing some of the shamanic stuff. It's a completely different experience. And so these things aren't right or wrong, but I think for me, the tendency of most people is to do things that exaggerate their imbalances rather than to recalibrate themselves. So if you think, and again, I'll probably say things and upset all the Wim Hof fans now, but your typical Wim Hof fan is an alpha male that wants to perform and climb a mountain in shorts, right? And that's what they like about it, right? So they're not. There's a lot of theatre, right? There's a lot of theatre, and there's a lot of, in my opinion, because it is an opinion, beefing up of aspects of manhood that aren't all necessarily healthy. So, for example, I don't like to read about people trying to walk up mountains in shorts and dying, trying to copy him, right? I've met people who've done shamanic things using cold water that have become seriously ill from exposure to cold water. So it's for me, the line he is treading, and he does it well, is between some advanced pranayama practices that are done to do very particular things that are unadvisable for people that understand those things. And so I don't share publicly advanced breathing practices because I think it's irresponsible. Right? What I do share publicly is what I would call are the basics of how to use your breath to lead a healthy life. But yeah, they're all part of it. But I think shamanic breathing and Wim Hof breathing for me are on the edges of the conversation and are not the heart of the conversation.
No, I agree. And I think the heart of the conversation is here and now, actually in our everyday life, where we can stay more centered, where we can become more aware of what's going on actually in our body, and through that our mind, and through that the universe which we are connected.
Yeah, and some days jumping in cold water to kickstart your nervous system and do that amazing thing, great, right? But when I hear a friend in West Wales who's jumping in cold water every morning before work, I kind of go, maybe you need to change your job, mate. Right? So it's kind of like, and I'm kind of making a joke in there, but it's in yoga, it's very, very clear. Non-violence. Non-violence is really, really clear, right? And there's something about people thinking they need to kind of hurt, no pain, no gain. There's a kind of massive, well, it's a little bit, as you saw with Bikram, right? Bikram, I mean, most commercially popular forms of yoga and wellness are probably not the best forms of yoga and wellness, right? Bikram, he knew that people being in a hot room, you can stretch more. So you'll think that you're doing it better, right? It's a great party trick, right? Being in a hot room, if you're a young person and men and guys and girls haven't got many clothes on around you, and it's all quite sweaty, it's probably quite erotic, right? and
to a lot of
So I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with hot. You can do these things; they can have their place.
Yeah.
But I think the extremes of hot and the extremes of cold are missing a beautiful truth, and I think that yoga is a difficult word to use nowadays, because I don't use the word publicly because it's meaningless publicly. To people that study, it's an incredibly powerful word, but when I look at what most people think of being yoga, it's kind of exercise, fashion, meetups. It's kind of like, it's not about yoga, these things. It's about socializing, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I work with Lululemon as an ambassador. I kind of understand the game, but in yoga we have some very simple things which are so true, and one of them is this need for sattva, peaceful, harmonious environment. And that is kind of, both digitally, physically, the food you drink, color and whatever. And in nature, you have the gunas. We call the gunas in yoga. There's kind of rajasic things, which are higher energy things. There's sattvic things, peaceful and harmonious. And there's tamasic things, which are kind of inert and kind of pull things down. Now, all of nature has this, but spiritual and personal development works best in sattva, in this sattvic space. And so for me, whether you come from shamanic traditions or Wim Hof or whatever, ultimately, some of that's quite rajasic and high energy, and you're going to have to move on to a sattvic place, peaceful and harmonious, to actually experience, I guess, ultimate bliss.
Yeah.
And that's what's lacking in the world. It's this sattvic thing. No one wants sattva because you can't sell sattva. Rajas cells.
Well, actually, it takes hard effort and dedicated work to get there, because you can't just get it. So if you've got modern day yogis saying you need sattva, they have to sell it using rajasic tools, because rajas is what excites people and gets people to do things. But I think there's too many people using rajas to sell things that appear sattvic that are still rajasic, right? They're still stimulating. It's like, if you think the Wim Hof thing, there's an element of theater, excitement, and Instagram and jumping here. It's all exciting. And I think the interesting thing now, right, when I work with some younger people in Amsterdam, is I think young people get this too. They don't want this overstimulated world. Yeah, they like it sometimes, but they're trying to find sattva. And I don't think anyone has found a way yet to bring more sattva into people's lives in a cool way, right? Because it can sound very austere, sattva. I have to hold you here. I'm sorry. This is greatly interesting. Actually, I will follow up on this, because I feel there's much more we have to talk about, also regarding your earlier question before we started the recording. And this might be actually some of it going further. Let me finish with this last question, Michael. And this is the question I always end. And I'm sorry, I regret that I have this meeting scheduled.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm meant to be doing something in 2 minutes too.
Yeah. So last question. What question about the breath didn't I ask, which I should have asked? And I know there's many questions.
Right. Where does it come from?
So where does it come from? Where does the breath come from?
Where does the impulse to breathe come from?
The desire to live?
The interesting thing is no one knows. This is quite, there's lots of people I know researching breathing things around the world in different places. But I think they'd all admit they don't really know. They don't understand the mechanism in the body and the brain that actually makes us breathe, right? They found kind of bits of it and parts of it and whatever, but it's a bit of a mystery. It's kind of like it's a good question, because it's a bit like saying, who am I? What part of me am I? Who am I? It's kind of, we can't really answer it. We can talk about it, but we can't answer. And the same thing with breathing. But I think it's like in meditation and in yoga practice, if you do a kind of an active exhalation, so you're forcing all the breath out of your body, and then just wait.
You have to breathe. Yeah.
It comes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of, I don't know the answer to the question, but it's a kind of question that would be a good question to ask, because it won't be answered. Yeah. But the searching for it is a bit like, who am I? What am I here for? Is just to look at it. Is while you're breathing, just wait for the next breath to come. And maybe because I think what happens in that moment is most people, when they're waiting for the next breath to come, they can't wait. They kind of want to step in. Yeah. And just observing that you're being breathed, right? Yeah. That you're being breathed. There's this kind of energy flowing through you that's pushing your breath in and out, a bit like the moon pulling the tides in and out. Yeah. And that's happening subconsciously. You have no idea really where it's coming from. Yeah. And I think, again, maybe that's a little kind of way of looping back to where we started about living in the unknown. Yeah. Is to realize your breath is your constant companion. It can be there to make you feel better, to help you cope with things or whatever. But it can also be your thread into your own inner unknown. Yeah.
Hey, Michael, it's been a great talk, both before and after the recording. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to have to cut it short.
That's cool, man.
I really greatly enjoyed it, and I'll be in touch later today.
Yeah, great. Nice meeting you, Julius.
I appreciate it.
Take care. Yeah.
Have a great day.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.